listening to the House by the Video Store podcast.
There's no more room in hell. The dead will walk near.
We have such sights to show you.
I kick ass for the Lord.
Praise God, get away!
Welcome to the House by the Video Store podcast. I'm your host, William, and joining me today will be
Sean and Derek.
And in this episode, we'll be discussing Insidious and Insidious Chapter 2 and 3, as Part 3 just hit theaters this past week. But before we get to that, we can do some brief discussion of news. And in the last podcast, we talked about the Scream series, and the past week, they have just revealed the ghost face mask that'll be in the Scream TV series. And it's not the classic ghost face. It's not the standard mask. This one's actually got an open mouth hole in it and leather straps.
Yeah,
Looks more like an S&M bondage, like dick sucking mask than like a. I'm not crazy on it.
That's actually how they kill everyone in this series, is by sucking them to death.
Just fellatio deaths.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like it better in shots from the trailer than I do just sitting there, but this lines up with their... William, weren't they saying it's like a humanoid type mask or something?
Well, originally they were saying that it was more fleshy. So this definitely isn't fleshy. Yeah. It's white, it's plastic, but it does have more of a human face than the ghost face.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of, just slightly, of that movie Bruiser that George Romero did. Mm-hmm. And he's a guy wearing like a white mask. I mean, it looks more like a human face in that film, but it kind of reminds me of that a little bit, which is... I mean, normally it's kind of creepy when something has like the form of a human face, but isn't actually a human face. But I think it's all right if they want to reinvent it. I think it's cool, and maybe they're doing that to kind of respect the previous, the film franchise, so they don't totally ruin plans of a fifth movie or anything. So they say, well, if this show sucks, then at least we didn't use the mask. But it is an odd choice to redo it.
I think they had said, some of the producers had said part of the reason they changed the mask was they're not doing it in the same location or with the same set of characters. So to make it not confusing to the viewer, they use a different mask because it can be the same wheelhouse of story, but just a, different cast, different killer, different mask.
Well, so I wonder if the original Screams will actually exist in this show, like if they'll be acknowledged that they happened as real events or as movie events, or if it's just going to be something that's just not even discussed or talked about.
If they're canonical.
Yeah.
Well, they said they're going to recreate the iconic opening scene, I think, was it the opening scene in the first Scream movie or whenever Drew Barrymore gets not Drew Barrymore, whoever gets killed in the garage door opener, Rose McGowan.
Yeah.
Well, aren't they going to recreate one of those scenes for the show? I think they mentioned as much, and it could be where the killer is recreating one of those kills,
Yeah.
So that leads me to believe there's a chance that it could exist, or they're just going to recreate it. But I feel like because the series is so aware of itself, they probably won't ignore it all the way. But who knows?
What would be a real, I don't know if it'd be good or bad, as if within the TV show, the Scream movies are a series of movies that never happened, and it's, the actors, or the actors, and it wasn't real. So then you're going like a layer deeper of meta, where within the Scream movies, they have movies of the events in the movies.
Yeah.
And then if you took it one layer further back, and it's like they're just watching the movies within the movies on a show. I don't know. I don't think...
And then they can make a movie version of this MTV show where the TV show is just a TV show.
So the TV shows, it'd just be... That'd be so hard to follow.
And then they can make it... and then like every episode can have its own music video that recaps what happens with Creed in it.
Yeah, only Creed, though.
Whoa, deal! Whoa, deal!
And then the universe can collapse on itself into a black hole.
Will we get Creed with Scott Sapp, or will we just do Alter Bridge? Because I think like Scott Sapp's homeless now, living in hotels or something, so he'd probably be hard to find. So it might just be Alter Bridge.
I don't know. You just set a plate of cookies out front with a glass of milk, and he might show up.
Or Santa, one of the two.
If you give a Scott Stapp a cookie, he'll steal your family. All right, so
for the most part, I like the mask. not
It's
saying
not
I think the show will be good, but I like it and I'm fine with it. I think it's kind of cool when they reinvent masks for movies like that. You know, like they slightly change up Jason Voorhees' mask and everything.
Like just seeing it in just a screenshot. I don't know if I'm that crazy about it, but maybe actually watching it in the show and getting to see it, I might like it better. It's just kind of a little bit. I was kind of expecting more of the iconic mask, and they changed up a little bit, which is fine because I think sometimes it's good to make yours because you don't want to rely too much on the past stuff and maybe kind of want this to stand out on its own. But
with those leather straps, it looks like if the Jason Voorhees mask and the Scream mask had a baby. That's what this mask looks like.
It does, yeah.
A little bit of Hannibal Lecter. It looks like. Does it look like there's like straps on the mouth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll have to see how the show turns out. I mean, horror on TV is an interesting prospect. But one thing I think I do want to talk about is if you haven't been watching this show already, in my opinion, it's one of the best horror shows on TV right now, which is Hannibal, it's surprising when you watch it that it's on NBC because the show has so many gory elements. So, of course, it's about the classic Hannibal Lecter character, has Will Graham in it, and it's kind of touching on events that happened prior to any of the movies, but apparently now they're going to start moving into the territory of the movies, having some of those characters in them. And Hannibal's played by Mads Mikkelsen, who I mostly remember as he played Le Chiffre in the Casino Royale Bond movie from a few years back.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah.
I never realized that.
So the show, I mean, I like the show a lot. It's very well acted, and it has some very gory death scenes and some very just like the aftermath of the kills. It's very gory and on par with what he did in the movies, if not more so. And like I said, it's super interesting that that's a horror show that's on NBC that I think has gorier elements than something like The Walking Dead that's on cable. And there's a lot of cool directors who rolled through that movie as well, like Vincenzo Natali has directed episodes. David Slade, who directed 30 Days of Night, has done some episodes.
Okay, yeah.
The showrunner is Brian Fuller, who previously had worked on a number of different shows. So it's got a good group of people behind it. The actors are all good. And they're doing some pretty freaking dark stories that I would say, you know, make it on par with any other horror thing I've seen on TV.
Yeah, I still need to dig into that. You said it's on Netflix?
It's on Amazon Prime, if you have Amazon Prime, the first 2 seasons. And then, you know, just another brief thing to touch on, because I saw a bunch of stories on this. I think Bloody Disgusting wrote an article about it, too, about last week's Game of Thrones. If you watch that show, had a scene with some undead. And I think Bloody Disgusting's article was about how Game of Thrones just owned Walking Dead. And I think it's just funny when you see a show like that has this huge budget, and they did a scene with like the undead or like zombie type creatures on a scale that I've never seen happen on The Walking Dead. And
awesome.
I think it illustrates how The Walking Dead is very much shot on a shoestring budget despite being so popular. So everything gets drawn, and it's 16 episodes. I think it should only be 10 per season at most, like Game of Thrones or these other cable shows are, because they stretch the budget way too thin. So every 4th episode, they run around and stab like 10 zombies in the head, and it squirts pixelated CGI blood out. And then in Game of Thrones, they're just throwing like 1,000 zombies down a cliff, and then they get back up and come after people. So it's just like the level of stuff you see on TV in this day and age has definitely increased. And even one of the most popular shows on TV, Game of Thrones and Walking Dead, both have huge horror elements in them. With Game of Thrones, I mean, it also has a lot of rape and incest and political intrigue.
All that good stuff.
Like all the stuff you want to wake the kids up from to just, you know, to watch.
It's good learning experiences.
But like I said, if you don't watch Game of Thrones and it's not your bag, that's fine. But it's a show that has so many different elements that appear in it, and just the horror stuff in the past, this season and some of the prior ones, it's pretty crazy too. And it's just good to see so many elements of the horror infiltrating all pop culture right now.
And one thing too on the pop culture is also I think Mastodon was in that episode as well, the heavy band.
Yeah.
Now I'm not trying to do any spoilers on it because I haven't watched it, but do they die by the undead, or is theirs death something else? Because I heard it's like pretty ridiculous how they die.
I mean, I didn't while I was watching it, I mean, I don't really listen to their music, but when I was watching, I wasn't aware they were anything special, so I don't really pay attention to those characters. So, question mark?
Well, I heard like they had like some really extremely gory deaths in it, so I have to go back.
I mean, I have to watch it. I mean, there's a lot of gory deaths, but I don't remember their characters specifically. But they were minor characters, so it's like
it was just like a cameo, I think, is all it was.
Yeah. So the moral of that story is, if you have Amazon Prime, make sure you watch Hannibal because it's really good. And Game of Thrones has some cool stuff in it this season if you dropped out or have interest in watching it. I guess now we can just get to the main event, the Insidious series. So I think we're just going to do full spoilers for part 1 and 2, because why would you listen to the podcast about part 3 if you weren't interested in watching it?
But to be fair, you can see part 3 and enjoy it without seeing the first 2.
Yeah, you really can.
That's the only thing, but chances are most people listening to this have probably seen 1 and 2 that have any interest in listening to this podcast at all.
So we'll do full spoilers for part 1 and 2, and part 3 we'll give more general thoughts and then go into spoilers for all the story elements. Just starting out, Insidious 1, the IMDb summary says, a family looks to prevent evil spirits from trapping their comatose child in a realm called the Further. The Furburger. That's the scariest place you could end up. There's just a bunch of rotted McDonald's hamburgers.
Actually, they wouldn't be rotted. They would just be like really, really old and stale, probably.
So this movie was directed by James Wan, who also directed Saw, and who recently directed Fast 7.
And The Conjuring as well.
Yeah. And starred Patrick Wilson, who was Night Owl from Watchmen, and in a bunch of movies. Rose Byrne, who was she was actually in the X-Men First Class reboot of the movies, is Moira McTaggart.
Yeah, I like her a whole lot.
Yeah, so she's in a lot of good stuff. She's in Bridesmaids,
Neighbors. She was great in that.
Yeah,
Adult Beginners.
So Insidious was it was in the post because it was from Blumhouse, so the same production team that did Paranormal Activity and a lot of those movies. So it's in that post Paranormal Activity time period, but it was more of just like a more classic ghost movie. That was kind of not a throwback, but just more similar to the stuff you used to get. I would say it has more in common with, say, a Poltergeist than it does Paranormal Activity.
But the original Poltergeist, not the remake.
Yeah. like regardless of what you think of like these movies, just like having watched them over the past few days, these movies have more scares in them by far. Any of these movies do than the Paranormal Activity, the Poltergeist remake that just came out a few weeks ago.
Oh yes, yeah.
It just puts into stark contrast how very little there was in the Poltergeist reboot that was actually scary. There was a tree that pulled somebody out of bed, but there was
a CGI tree.
But then comically just had them dangling in the tree.
And then let them down easily.
But very gently let him down. And it's like, oh, your dad's back. We're just going to drop you on the ground.
I wasn't touching this young boy.
But one thing, too, I think I like about, just the Insidious franchise, especially the one, is like, while they did a bunch of scares, it wasn't cheap scares. It wasn't like, I hate to make fun of Poltergeist, but the biggest scare in the movie was a friggin' squirrel in the attic, Whereas like this one, there wasn't really any cheap scares. They didn't just go into like every horror movie ever and just do like, they kind of had more original scares. And not that they're all completely original.
But they were jump scares. They were jump scares.
They were jump scares, but it wasn't anything really cheap. It wasn't, like a little kid or, stuff like that. It was more... I liked it. Typically these aren't the type of movies that I like, but everything they did very well. It wasn't a cheap or, just they didn't feel like a money grab movie. It felt like it actually had a little bit of thought into it.
And the jump scares tied into, typically there was a jump scare because there was actually something that could be considered scary on screen or happening.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like Derek said, like a squirrel or a dog or a cat or, So, and two, this was actually one of the videos that showed up in Corey's top 5 movies that actually scared me list.
And another thing, too, real quick, these are also PG-13 movies. And I think a lot of times, like when people see horror movies are PG-13, that's a turnoff automatically. But I honestly don't feel like these movies would have gained anything at all if they made them rated R.
Yeah.
Because I think they worked very well with the rating that they had. And I think that everything they did was extremely effective. So I think like these movies, a lot of times, like if I see horror movies PG-13, I'm almost uninterested in it because a lot of them you get stuff like The Poltergeist, or you get stuff like The Grudge or The Ring, or you get movies like that. And these movies with that rating did a really good job of keeping everything scary. And they never really, once the shit happens, it doesn't slow down. It's continuous. I think the first one took a little bit more to build up as far as getting to like all the stuff happened. But once something happened, the shit just hit the fan. It was nonstop till the end of the movie.
Yeah. And another thing too, though, that I think for me, it matters when watching these types of films is where and how you watch them. Like I saw the first two, at home on my television. Not a lot scared me in them, but like, not to jump too far ahead, but the third one, I don't know if this is because I watched it in theaters, but that was a lot more effective for me.
I agree. I think these movies work best if you're going to watch them. It need to be at night. It needs to be really dark. Because I had to rewatch them yesterday, so I watched all of them during Sunday afternoon and the morning, and they don't really have the same effect as if it had if I watched it like in a basement at night.
Like I did watch mine in the basement, and at night, and it's just I don't know, but I think it's also there's more distractions. You can like look at your phone or whatever. But that's also a cause of the film, as far as I go. My opinion is kind of losing me sometimes. They're getting a little boring, and like William said too, going back to the PG-13 rating, William said it's a little bit more like a throwback horror film, and the older ghost stories, things were a lot more tame back then, and you can kind of get by with kind of building an atmosphere and mood and scares as far as ghost stories goes without that gore, because that typically isn't expected. So it is a good fit for PG-13. It's totally fine for these movies, I think, too, and I don't even miss any gore or whatever that could have been in them.
Because it would be almost unneeded in the movie.
It would feel gratuitous at that point.
Yeah.
Well, one thing
it's always bad.
One thing too I liked about these movies, at least the first one and the second one and the third one too, really.
All of them.
Yeah. Well, the third one had a few things. We'll get to that, but not the monsters, but the ghosts in this movie were like a freaking like Darth Maul demon thing, and like a scary witch lady. And even though like the scary
and a
old
vampire
lady,
looking guy,
yeah, like even though like some of those are slightly cliche, I still, going back to I think our discussion on It Follows, I prefer that a million times to freaking scary face little kids where the mouths like expand when they scream, or I'm tired of little girls with their hair in their face. Like, just give me something that's not little kids with like the pale white faces who scream and their mouths are super wide when they scream.
One thing that pulled me out of this movie a little bit was, and I felt like maybe I was being picky, was the way that it was shot. It's a lot of handheld, and you feel like you're like in the room, but not necessarily in a good way. And my wife even pointed out, she brought up, she's like, I don't like the way this is shot. It makes me feel like somebody's just standing there moving around the camera. And I think subconsciously for me and her too, it kind of breaks a lot of the tension, because it doesn't feel like you're like an omnipresence where you're just watching what's going on. It just feels like people are part of, this is a production kind of, and also, and I don't know if because of that or because of the character design, some of the, scary ghosts, they almost seem like they're like, would be in a haunted house you would go visit.
Yeah.
They looked a little bit, I don't want to say cheesy, but almost just a little bit bland, and they kind of didn't do it for me really that well. Not that I like hated it, but and the movie was pretty good overall, especially compared to more recent horror films. But I feel like there was those two things kind of broke some tension for me.
Well, maybe part of it could be related to the production house that put this together, Blumhouse, so that people being involved with paranormal activity. Maybe that kind of helped like make them decide to make stuff more handheldy.
Yeah,
doc style.
I wasn't even thinking about that, and then when you mentioned that in the intro, I was thinking that's probably kind of the feel they were going for, coming straight out of that. And you see the second one, I feel like it's a little bit less than the second one, and then the third one like totally gets away from it, which I prefer the way the third one's presented the most.
And I will say, like, unrelated to these movies really, but the previews for the third one, there's like at least 2 found footage horror films they showed trailers for before Insidious Chapter 3. And it just highlights to me like how over that genre I am.
Yeah.
And how if you cut a trailer for a found footage film, it's very difficult to ever make it have any tension or build any dread or make you interested in the movie because it's just shaking.
Yeah.
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 I think it's just that genre is, I think, just kind of flooded to the extreme at this point.
And here's why, yeah, real quickly touching on that. Here's why I think that genre is being stretched and was kind of in vogue. And yeah, it came back in style with Paranormal Activity. But, you know, when Blair Witch came out, there was debate, is this real? And I think that's what a lot of that was. Well, at this point, we've had so many of those films that it's just like, oh, this is supposed to be found footage. And unless it's really, really good and really nails it, it has the opposite effect of watching a film where it just pulls you out of it even more.
Yeah, so...
kind of getting back to the Insidious, one thing I really liked about these movies is, a lot of them, they keep the same, 1 and 2 has the same cast. Like, the family maybe wasn't like the most, I mean, they weren't like bad characters or anything. And most of the actors they picked were actually pretty good for the roles. And although there were a lot of children in the movie, none of the kids were annoying, which I think is very good because a lot of times in horror movies, just like Poltergeist a couple weeks ago, they made the main focal point the brother, and he was just a really annoying kid. And while the kids were the kids were focused on the movie, they weren't the only focus. And the kids, for the most part, they were actually good at what they were doing.
Yeah.
And Elise's character was great. Yeah. And the spectral sighting guys, like the ghost hunters that come in, like those 3 characters were pretty great.
Yeah.
And I just really enjoy them because it's just like they were enough. I don't know. I don't really want to say like the ghost hunters like comic relief almost, but just the way they act, it just fits perfectly in with everything else that was going on because they're so just kind of different. It
almost made the film not seem to take itself too seriously.
Yeah. So
you kind of forgive some of the other stuff. But touching on the characters, it's the same writer for all 3 movies, and maybe somebody helped out on the story on 2 or something. I don't know. But is it Leigh Whannell, which he also directed the 3rd one?
Yeah.
I felt like the mom and dad characters, the first Insidious kind of jumps into it, and I don't feel like there was a real good sense of the characters. Like you kind of knew who they were, but I didn't feel really attached to them. Kind of like Derek was saying, they were there, they were all right, they were fine. And Patrick Wilson, when he pops up in movies, I'm like, okay, cool, I like him, but really the best I can say about him is he speaks loudly and clearly. Like he's just kind of there.
There is a ghost in the room.
Yeah, like he's fine, but especially seeing him this and Conjuring and stuff, I kind of hope he gets away from the Jane one. They quit working together for a little while, but yeah, this film didn't really have a lot of characters I was involved with. I didn't dislike them; none of them were annoying, but I felt like it was more about the ghost story and all and all that aspect, and that's what was supposed to keep you going on it. And I felt like 2, even though it was a little contrived, they tried to bring more depth to it. And then by the 3rd one, the characters in the story were like really good, and the scares were just like some extra stuff. So the first one, I feel like it was a little weak on that end as far as pulling you into caring about these characters as much as you could.
Yeah, I think as they went on, they kind of developed the characters more and more. But I think they set a good groundwork for like the ghost hunters, because I think those are probably the ones, that we're going to be in. If they continue to make them, will probably still be in them. But
yeah,
I think that as they went on, like 2 developed the characters, because 2 it was more just a direct continuation of 1. It wasn't almost a sequel. I mean, they took off literally right after one ended. But one other thing too I liked that I thought was kind of creepy, that the pictures they showed in one of the pictures they took of him as a kid, they had the ghost lady in the back of all of them. I did kind of like that because that was actually kind of creepy. It did have some good creepy moments in it. I don't, like I said, I think too, depending on where you watch it, affects the amount of scares you actually get out of it. But overall, I mean, I think that it's definitely a lot higher level of horror movie than a lot of the other stuff, like all of the other mainstream stuff that's being put out at the moment.
Well, too, like I think one thing that we kind of have to filter these movies through is watching as many horror movies as we have. you kind of become jaded to some extent about actually being scared by anything. Because it's relatively difficult for me to watch a movie these days and to actually be scared.
I know. You've seen all the tricks. You kind of, you know,
so like
desensitized.
Kind of unrelated to this, but like the internet. I'm actually going to be doing a video about this week. The movie The Nightmare. There's about sleep paralysis that we had mentioned before. I actually watched it, and it like recreated some of the dreams in the movie. And they actually mentioned Insidious in that movie. Is like they thought that was somewhat inspired by sleep paralysis, things like that. But like that movie, when I got done watching it, it wasn't that I was scared, but like I would look around the corner before I went in the room and it was dark. You know, like you thought about it some. And I think that Insidious, depending on, like to me, it wasn't scary, but it did make you, you know, afterwards, like, you know, you might look around the corner before you go in the dark room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's about as good as most movies can do these days.
And if this is the type of thing that you're kind of typically scared, you know, you don't like being at your home at night in the dark and you kind of get scared easily, then yeah, I can see these films being a lot more effective. But if you're just somebody that's typically not scared of the dark and aren't constantly dreaming stuff up in your mind, I think it's a little bit less effective.
One other thing too I want to say I liked about these movies a lot is the first half, most of the movies, like the second one's a little bit different, but the first one, they went to the premise where they tried to show you the least amount of the stuff that they could at the beginning, which I think sometimes showing less and just building the suspense of what it actually could be makes it actually a more scary experience, and then just throwing all the shit at you at once. You know, I did like that because a lot of times you would see, like, there'd be stuff in the room, and where I think 2 kind of got a little bit away from that. But in 1, you know, I like that you see silhouettes in the house, or you see something behind the, you know, you'd see something behind the curtains. And I think that stuff, to me, that's more effective to scare me than just showing me what it is.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's one reason maybe why it's so effective at scaring people is because they set a good atmosphere and they give you little tidbits of what it was, but didn't actually let you see it till later on in the movie.
Then to the getting, you know, just kind of wrapping up Insidious chapter, or I guess it was Insidious. It wasn't a chapter or anything at that point. But
but they were probably planning on it.
Yeah, well, the way they ended it did. But like, you know, the way that they resolve, you know, the son getting out of the coma and getting away from the demon, like that plays into like the whole like astral projection thing, which is one of those I don't even know if you can call it a science, but a soft science if it's that people actually believe in and people actually do, not necessarily the way it's portrayed in this movie, but people do, like I've read there's like subreddits about it where people actually like they'll like give each other indicators and try to find each other in the dream world, and there's all this stuff. So they took something that's somewhat, I don't know, real, but it isn't. It is a phenomenon people talk about.
Yeah,
and then work that into the story of the movie, which I always think works pretty well because you somewhat ground it in plausibility while, you know, opening it up into the actual horror elements. And like I said, you know, like all the characters in movies are pretty good. I think, you know, kind of the standout character in this franchise when you look at it across all 3 movies is the character of Elise, which is relatively odd, especially in the third one. You see a horror franchise where one of the cornerstone characters is a 70-year-old woman. You don't see that too often.
I love that she kind of kicks ass.
And I mean, I guess we can go ahead and go into part 2. Just, you know, the way the first one ended with the character of Elise being killed, and you find out that Josh Lambert, played by Patrick Wilson, is actually possessed by the witch demon. Like, you know, that's a pretty good way to lead into the next movie. And then,
real quick, just before we get too far, you touching on kind of the astral projection and this, you know, other world thing that kind of, I guess it can be a shared experience or at least a phenomenon that people have. One thing that the first movie and kind of all these made me think about was a little bit like David Lynch, his ideal that, you know, there's something, well, I don't want to say phenomenal, but, you know, there's something else there other than what's in front of your eyes, which is a common theme in some of his films, you know, Twin Peaks and Blue Velvet and all that. Yeah. Not that they go in a different world, but like there's a darker side of the town. And I felt like it was almost like that, you know, instead of going into, what is it called in Twin Peaks?
Oh, the
Lodge. Yeah. Instead of going to the Lodge, you know, they go into the further. So I feel like it kind of pulled into that, which is, which is probably very much like you said, it feels like something that people kind of almost expect to exist, and it seems like they probably have for a very long time as far as civilization goes. I just don't think it's handled as well in here, but I do like that spin on this whole franchise, especially the first one. That's what I kind of, even though some of it didn't work as well as I think it could, definitely think is a great element to this entire franchise that it all kind of hinges on.
And the second movie, Chapter 2, it does something that I don't like in a lot of movies where it kind of overwrites events of the prior movie. And when it fleshes out the backstory of the witch, and you find out it's not actually a female at all, it's a guy and who was driven mad by his mom. Like,
so it's kind of like shit. What was that camp movie we did?
Sleepaway Camp.
Yeah,
that's
so it's
exactly
like,
what I thought.
Yeah, it's just like, so that could, yeah, it'd be fine if they did a tie-in somehow to those two things.
Well, there wasn't a full frontal nudity scene. There wasn't a rapist cook that we know of. That we know of.
Yeah, we know of.
So
They can make the Conjuring Force some Sleepaway Camp 6. Or
Just tie them in together.
Sleepaway Camp, Conjuring, the Insidious.
Did I say the Conjuring? I meant the Insidious.
But you can tie it into because Patrick Wilson is in both
Yeah.
movies, so he's just like put old man makeup so he can cancel his younger self. But like the continuation of the story, so I think Insidious Chapter 2 it's a different feeling movie than the first one by far. Like it doesn't have the same feel. It's less ghost story. It's less like ghost house type scares, and just more you see more of what's happening. It's more of the understanding the backstory and taking action part.
Which I think, like, I like when things are explained, but sometimes I don't. Like, I'm a hypocrite on that. I think this one explained too much, and then they went too much in the backstory of everything that happened, which I think sometimes takes me out of the movie experience a little bit, because it doesn't seem to make things as creepy when you know every single thing that's going on. I think sometimes when it's a little bit unknown, it makes it a little bit scary because you don't know why. You know, if it was just the lady in black and they didn't explain like who she was or what she was, I think that would have been scarier than giving it an entire backstory. Because once you find out that it was just like the mom was forcing him to dress up like a girl, so I guess that's why he killed women, it's just kind of like, it's not as, I don't think this one did as effective as the first one, because they, like a lot of the scares in the movie, like you said, they just showed you everything up front. There wasn't a whole lot of hidden things in this one, and there wasn't as many silhouettes or just, I think the overall atmosphere was a little bit less creepy because they just set it up. It just felt like a different.
Well, you'd already had kind of the curtain pull back on the universes, on that movie universe's scares. You're aware of what's creating them, which makes it slightly less scary. But I want to say, like, this movie has some flashback scenes to showed Josh Lambert's mom when she was younger, and I do like when movies just cast young actors that bear a somewhat resemblance to the older actors versus using the age up and age down makeup or special effects, which typically looks terrible.
She was played by that lead from House of the Devil too, the young Lorraine.
Yeah,
she's really good.
Yeah, that was a good movie. That was you really didn't learn anything about why it happened. But
another thing too I liked is I can't think of the guy's name, but her assistant from the 80s, Elisa's assistant,
Coral.
I actually liked him a lot in the movie too. I think he was a good add to the movie. I enjoyed his character. You know, I think they probably could have used him a little bit better, but I did enjoy them adding him in there, as I do think he actually brought something else to the movie.
Too, just like one thing to note, I don't know if we've mentioned it yet. So out of the spectral sightings investigators, the guy Specs with the glasses, he's the writer Leigh Whannell, or how do you pronounce his name, and the director of the third one. So I guess that's why they always just write themselves into the movies.
But I think that they're really enjoyable characters, you know, because I think that like they kind of make fun of the ghost hunter type people in the movie, but I think that they are also I really enjoyed them. Like I think sometimes you put characters like in movies, they sometimes can take you out of it, or they can just be annoying. But I feel like the way that they wrote those characters is you can probably relate them to people you know in real life. and I think that was what makes them more enjoyable.
Well, they were comic relief without being Michael Bay style comic relief, where they're grating and terrible characters and people that you hate to see on screen. They actually were likable.
Like I said, there's people I know in my life that kind of remind me of those people. So I think that the way they're written and played works well because he said they're not so over the top. They're not like they're not putting one-liners out. It's just the stuff they do might be a little ridiculous or just kind of funny.
Like when they're first introduced, the one guy's like eating a burrito. So, okay, well, this is how these guys are, how they operate, which is funny because there's a callback to that in the third movie. And first time you see him.
Yeah, and in the second one at the end, when they go meet up with the other family, I think he's in like a Hot Pocket or something.
Yeah.
I just love how like, every time they show up, he's kind of like unprofessional because he's always eating, and I don't know, it just makes him somewhat likable because people that probably do things like that.
And in this movie, like we'll kind of get to similar elements in the third one, but it has when Patrick Wilson's character Josh is possessed, like there's like a really scene, like I don't know why, but like anything that has to do with teeth always kind of grosses me out. He has like the scene like where he has like teeth falling out, and
he rips one of them out, I think.
Yeah, and he's like starting to like, as a human is inhabited by a spirit, it makes him like decay or age or just start looking all crystal methy. And it's one of those things like I would assume that once the possession ends, you go back to normal. But like, is he like, are
his
the teeth
are
still
gone?
Yeah,
his
like,
teeth are just jacked.
He's gonna have to go to the dentist and spend
Well, the only thing I'm gonna say is like, look at the Evil Dead remake. That girl like cut her tongue up and like did all this body mutilation and then burned her skin off in the shower. And as soon as she was normal, she's like, "Oh, I'm fine." So maybe you could just go with, maybe it's just the demon entity takes all the blunt of that, and then once they're gone, your body just goes back. I don't know. Like that's kind of a stretch, but that's the only thing you can really assume because he seemed pretty normal. Once
I would have liked it if it been like his front teeth, so he just looked creepy the rest of the movie.
Or like after he's like have like a scene like the epilogue scene. So after the movie, like the family goes to the restaurant to get some food, and he goes to bite down, and somebody's like, "What the fuck? I'm missing 3 teeth. I can't eat a burrito."
I thought you were going to say he's in the dentist chair, and then all of a sudden the demon's over his face right before they do the procedure. So they're putting him under.
I think this movie suffered a little bit from what I like to call like the Fast and Furious syndrome, where like you kill a character off, then you're like, fuck, I shouldn't have killed this character off. So then you try to think of ways to incorporate characters back into the movie that you killed off, like with Elise. She's a really good character, but they killed her off immediately in the beginning of the second movie. So they're like, she's still a really good character, so let's find ways to bring her back.
Thank God it plays into the story, at least, though. It's
it does, but I always have problems with that because it just reminds me of Beer Fest. Like, they killed Trash Can off, or dumped whatever his name was, and they brought him right back. Whereas in this, like, they killed her off, but it's like, why did you kill her off? Because you're going to still incorporate her in the story very heavily.
I think part of it is, in any of these movies, they try to establish stakes and to make things be shocking or to do things like that. But then they decide afterwards, like, well, even though we want the universe to have impact and to have, actual consequence, so we're going to kill a character. But once they kill the character, they're like, well, damn, they were kind of the linchpin of what we wanted to do. So how can we work around this?
They were the best thing in this franchise. Shit.
Yeah, and it's just like, that's the biggest problem I had with 2 is like, I at least it was probably the character I enjoyed the most, but you killed her off, so either just do away with it and don't call her back. But I guess in this universe that they have set
I think
up,
it totally works for
for
me.
Yeah, it did work. No, it did. It completely worked. Like, it made complete sense, and they did it in a way that didn't bother me. But then again, it's just like, but I don't know. It's just like you killed her off and you brought her back because this would have been better maybe just to like leave her. But it did work, and it worked well, and it wasn't like it made the movie awful and unwatchable. It did work within the confines of the story that they set up, so it was fine.
I guess we can kind of start summarizing our thoughts on this before we move into part 3 or chapter 3.
This one, to me, it's like number 1 or just Insidious, I think was overall a better movie. This one tended to develop the characters a little bit more, gave you a little bit more life to Elise, and they brought in Carl, which I liked a lot. Maybe, like you said, they kind of backtrack on stuff they set up in the first one. But I still think overall, like, it's a very good movie. It's still, I think, a lot higher quality than a lot of the other stuff that's put out now. So I liked it a lot. And they kind of developed the specs and the the Spectre sighting guys. So I still like them a lot. I think the movie still had a lot going for it. Just kind of lost out in the scares, like you said, like earlier. They kind of showed you what they had in the first one. So with this same set of characters in the same areas, they kind of ran out of things to do. And the story kind of got backtracked. But I still think it was overall a very good movie. I think you couldn't really... There's not a whole lot bad with it, but there's not a whole lot good with it either on just this one. But I still think one was better.
What'd you think, William?
So I like the first one more. I felt the second one was a little bit different type of movie. It was less scary and more just kind of a continuation of the story and finding more backstory elements to it. So it wasn't so much as scary as the first one or attempting to be as scary as the first one. To me, it felt more like a paranormal movie where the scares still happen, but it's more story-oriented and action-oriented than the first one and the third one.
Yeah. That's kind of how I feel, too. It almost reminds me of the Raid and Raid 2, oddly enough, because the first Raid is, for the most part, a pure action film, and part 2, they try to set it up as fleshing out the universe, and it almost feels like Scarface, where it's just this long story and a lot of these different characters. Which I think works fine for that franchise, but same thing with this. Instead of focusing on just like a little ghost house with a few characters that the first one does, the second one tries to keep continuing to build the universe. And while some of it works, for the most part, it loses its impact. And you're always going to lose that impact with horror films after you've kind of, as you said, pulled back the curtain. So that's exactly how I felt about this one. So they didn't start out with strong characters to begin with, and they kind of continue with this family. And even though they reveal some interesting things, it's just, the second one didn't do it for me as much as the first. And even though the first, as I said, I didn't think it was stellar or anything, but it was fine. It's a fine watch, but nothing up there high on my list as far as horror films go.
All right, so now we can move into Insidious Chapter 3. And we said before, we'll do just a brief general discussion of it before getting into full spoilers, just to kind of give you an opinion of whether or not it's worth seeing if you're interested. And just according to IMDb, this movie is a prequel set before the haunting of the Lambert family that reveals how gifted psychic Elise Rainier reluctantly agrees to use her ability to contact the dead in order to help a teenage girl who has been targeted by a dangerous supernatural entity. It's a pretty long synopsis for something. But
you got to explain why this is different than the original trilogy. It gets complicated.
So, like, we decided last week we would do the this week's podcast on this movie. I was slightly concerned. I was like, is this going to be even worth seeing? Yeah, we just seen Poltergeist not too long ago. That was kind of a not good movie, kind of a waste of time.
Well, like I was kind of not looking forward to seeing this. I felt like we should do it for the site. I was on totally on board with it, but at the same time, I thought, okay, this is going to be a little bit of a chore if this is not good, what Poltergeist was.
Yeah, you think about it, like, me and my girlfriend got a little bit of discussion after watching this last night, because I was like, this movie had everything going for it to be awful. Mm-hmm. It was a number 3 in a horror franchise where the movies, the first one was strong, the second one was weaker, and this one is it was PG-13, so it had all these different elements where it could have just been bad, but in my opinion, I think I actually enjoyed this one more than any of the other ones.
Yeah, this was, by far, I mean, the first one, you gave it credit for creating this world and setting things up, so even though that part's spoiled, I just think everything in this film was done better.
Well, like the atmosphere was better, the scares were better, and they went back to, we're not going to show you everything up front. You're going to have to earn, because they just gave you little tidbits of everything. You get to see something here, something there, some noises. And I think to me, like, because it was more of like a haunted house feel, and when you do things like that where you don't show everything up front and you don't really know what you're messing with, that makes it scary because more the unknown, like, and because nothing was fully explained in this one. Where like they went back and explained everything in the second one.
They knew when to show restraint, but at the same time, the scares in the film, they built up tension. It wasn't like a just typical jump scare. Like there was a lot of scenes, kind of some of them back to back, where it was just, you knew what you were looking for, or you knew what to be scared of. It wasn't just like, oh, there's something that popped up or whatever. And they just did a great job of building tension. And when I was in theaters, I heard this lady say it in this one scene. She was like, "This is stressing me out," and that's kind of the feel on some of these scenes. But it was in a good way, It was.
Well, I think one thing too that I really liked the movie is like because like one of the main focal points was Elise, which is kind of nice to have her. Because in other movies, like she was there, but she was never really there. Like you never really got to see her on screen for long points of time, or her character was more held back. Whereas this one, throughout the movie, you got her more and more. And I think that the fact that her character, as strong as she was through most of the movies, for her to get scared at certain points kind of helped too.
And
so what did you think overall, William?
So I think one good way to sum this up is just by like the audience level of participation in this movie versus when we saw Poltergeist. So Poltergeist, it was actually a late night showing, so it's already dark out, late at night. So that's like the prime time to see a horror movie is like, a late weekend night, and when you're seeing it in the theaters. And this one we saw midday on a Sunday, so it wasn't quite, as good of a time to see it, but the audience was so much more into anything that happened in this one than Poltergeist. Mm-hmm. Like I think this one, and two, it was a different director than the first two. It was a first-time director, Leigh Whannell, or however you pronounce his name, Lee? I don't know.
Lee.
But the movie had scares that got built up to, and then when they happen, like you're in them.
Yeah.
And it's just like, shit, what's going to happen? And it actually built some sense of dread.
He knew exactly how to work the audience. Well, I felt better than James Wan. But again, like I said before, I saw this in the theaters. The other two I watched at home. Yeah. So I don't think I can fairly gauge those. But, we're talking about this movie now. It's out in theaters. So I would say see it while it's in theaters now.
And even if you didn't see the prior two, or if you saw them and if you liked the first one and the second one, or you just... I don't know, because I think you can come into this one without having seen those. There's only a few nods here and there to it. Like, it's not tied in any direct way.
No. I mean, like I said, it gives you a little bit of, like, acknowledgement of the other two films, but you could completely come in and have never seen them and enjoy this one completely.
And one thing that, at least with this movie, that I found to be, like, I think I mentioned it before, like, one thing that always grinds my nerves is when they have these movies set in, like, houses that in reality cost like $1 million and up, and the family doesn't have professions that would support them owning a house of that size. Mm-hmm. So like the first Insidious, they had that huge freaking house. Like this one, that's mostly in their apartment building. So I think at least somebody who up until recently has been living in an apartment, I can more relate to being in the apartment building and having things happen than being in like a huge mega mansion. That
it was just a great setting. There's also a great... I think it's a little bit in the trailer, which I really didn't watch the trailer. I kind of avoided it because these films they seem like little ghost stories, and I heard they were fine. But, so much modern horror I kind of get bored of. So I wasn't really into this franchise. I heard it was pretty good, but I don't want to spoil too much about this one. But aside from the apartment complex, there's also another element to it that kind of mixes up the typical haunted house movies where they're running around trying to escape things.
Another thing too is, speaking to the fact that it's an apartment building, it's not a direct thing, but there's a scene or two that reminded me heavily of The Shining, just like the hallway scenes. I love that because
I was thinking that I was getting that vibe too.
The 70s-ish carpet in the hallways, I love that because I don't think that was maybe it was direct or indirect on whether one they wanted to give you that feel or not, but it definitely reminded me of The Shining because there's this dread in the hallway when you're going through it, like you don't know what you're going to get into, you don't know, and I think that worked really great because that'd be kind of creepy to be in that situation in real life and some of the stuff that girl was put through. So it's like, I really like that a lot.
Like, one thing I will say is that kind of like the first movie, I think the first movie had a better sketched out family dynamic than this one. Because your main character, you get her perspective, your main character, Quinn Brenner. So, you know, she's easier to understand. Like, she misses her mom who passed away. And you understand that the dad in this movie, Sean Brenner, he's a little bit more broadly sketched. Just the dad who is kind of clueless, but his heart's in the right place. Like, you don't, and then the brother is in there, like, 2 scenes. You see the brother, and he's, like, once again, pretty broadly sketched. So I don't think that the family dynamics are great, but you just get the general emotions underlying it. So I don't think you need as much. But
her, to be fair, her character for me is the most developed character that's not like Elise or anybody in this whole series. I mean, of course, Elise gets developed more through this because it's a prequel, but her character, they did a really good job with that. Another thing that it always happens with franchises that are, you know, become franchises or prequels, especially prequels, where, you know, it can be a positive thing because you're satisfying the audience, but at the same time, it can feel like it's just filling time and connecting all these dots, which some of them, you know, dare I say it, Marvel movies do, where they just kind of like, oh, these little callbacks or whatever. So I felt like this film had a balance of being obligated to connect some dots for the audience members and kind of show some things to please them. And I don't want to say it got in the way of the story, but it kind of, you know, this story it lives on its own, but at the same time, that kind of pulls you out of it a little bit for me. But it's also a satisfaction thing where people want to see that. So just the nature of it being a prequel, I think has some positives and negatives for it.
Yeah, so I think we can kind of just wrap up our thoughts on this and then get into spoilers. So just to kind of start off, so like as you've heard everything we said, this is a movie that I didn't really have high expectations for, and also like Sean, like I didn't even watch the trailer. Because for most horror movies, depending on the marketing team. So actually, the movie that Derek reviewed, the found footage movie, was it Infernal?
Yeah.
The trailer they had for that movie, I don't know if it's on YouTube, it's on Vimeo. It actually gave away the ending of the movie in the trailer, like very clearly showed the ending to the movie.
I think a lot of times
the Insidious trailer shows a lot of stuff in it because I just watched it last night after watching the film, and I thought, oh man, I'm glad I didn't watch the trailer first.
So trailers for these movies tend to give away too much, so I didn't even watch it for this one.
Yeah, they tend to just give away their best stuff in the trailer. So when you watch the movie, it's not even, you know, there's no reason to even be scared or be surprised because they showed you everything in the trailer, which I don't understand. You know,
so you have, you know, so I didn't watch the trailer. I just waited to kind of get general word from a few different reviewers that I typically agree with, and they all were enthusiastic about it. So you know, it's a prequel, the third movie's in a series by a first time director. Those are all things that typically don't bode well for movies, but I actually thought that this one was on par with the first one, and people like, sounds like you, Sean, may actually like this one more because I just thought it was effectively done. You like the characters, and it's just, you know, it's a good sign that a PG-13 horror film's made that does that, and it did okay at the box office. I think it made like $22 million for the weekend, so the same general ballpark as Poltergeist, and since those movies are relatively inexpensive to make, it should turn a profit. And that's a series I wouldn't mind to see some more entries in, especially compared to, you know, the Paranormal Activity 7s or whatever these other franchises are.
Well, one thing I got a question, though, too, is do you think that Poltergeist being the shit bucket that it was could have actually hurt this movie a little bit? You know?
I don't think
I think recent horror films overall could have hurt this movie as they do. And like I said, that's why I didn't watch many of I didn't watch Insidious films before and wasn't interested in this because of just this it's so saturated at times and there is so much junk out there.
So any other thoughts before you start moving to the spoilers?
Yeah, one more thought on this. Even throughout the film, I was thinking about this. The movie has a theme of like loss, you know, losing people and kind of dealing with that and moving on, but also kind of confronting those things, and it's all throughout the film. It's very well developed and scripted and everything. And I was trying to think, I couldn't really articulate the theme of the first two movies really that well, you know.
Yeah.
In this movie, there's multiple people that have lost people and different perspectives on it and stuff. The first movie, it feels like, let's make a ghost house movie. And then the second movie, okay, let's make it like Amityville Horror a little bit, where the dad gets possessed. So this film, I feel like it was better developed overall. Not a perfect film, but if you want to see a summer horror film, definitely pick this over Poltergeist. But this is not a bad choice at all. I recommend going to see it for sure.
Yep. So before we move into spoilers, we can all just briefly discuss what we're doing on the internet. So if you like the podcast, as always, make sure to go and give us a review on iTunes. Let us know what you think. You can always comment too. We put these on YouTube. We've actually gotten some feedback on YouTube. Was it on YouTube? Kurt's Classics been a big fan, giving us some
Thank
love,
you.
and actually gave us some advice on the Fox issue we had with content being taken down for copyright stuff. So
yes, so appreciate that. Yeah, thanks for all the feedback too.
And so you can find the podcast on iTunes, or if you want to comment on it, you can comment even on Facebook or Twitter when we post them. You can also find all the work we're doing at housebythevideostore.com. That's the best place to go to find everything because, we've said before, some of this video stuff, some of it we have to post places other than YouTube. So it's always easier just to go to the site to find all the content we're putting out. And there's always links to all these podcasts and any of the social media stuff. We always have links to those from that site as well. But if you want to see what we're doing specifically on the internet this week, you can find me on Twitter at Will_droid.
I'm at Blevin Sean, and recently to touch on it real quick, I did a little video on Dark Knight of the Scarecrow, which was a 1981 TV movie that I think it's worth checking out if you like discovering old classics and films that were almost lost.
Yeah, that's
Derek.
You can find me at on Instagram at MetaWorldDerek, and on Twitter, which I use sparingly, which I do use it though. You can find me at DWCap90. But Twitter is something I don't use a whole lot. I'm more used to Instagram.
Yeah, and to go back to the Dark Knight of the Scarecrow, the TV movies like that don't get made anymore. Or if they do, it's like just bullshit on ABC Family. It's like one of the guys from Backstreet Boy did a Headless Horseman movie or something, which wasn't very good. But
or like an Air Buddies Halloween edition movie or something, which I heard somebody discussing the other day. I was on a quick thing. I was helping somebody shoot a film, and I overheard this guy talking about when the Air Bud series went downhill.
Yeah, I actually remember watching the Air Bud series. Also, though, the Ernest movies weren't that bad. You think about like Ernest. Didn't Ernest like have Halloween and Save Christmas?
No, but those aren't.
Those are different.
He may have had one TV movie.
Yeah, those were different, but
it's kind of surprising in this day and age there aren't more TV movies on things like HBO or AMC that are horror movies. But
that's a good point, and you never know. That could be become in vogue now. Because of the way television's changing and the type of genres people are watching now, and how much better television is getting. And they keep even people even say like a lot of filmmakers, quote unquote real filmmakers are some of those guys are moving to TV now and doing TV stuff. So that's a good point. Like that may be another little market that they can start pulling from. Making some TV movies to get more audiences to watch television instead of everybody going straight to Netflix.
yeah, so I think we're running a little bit low in time. So just on spoiler talk. The ghost in this movie, the main ghost, the breathing man, it was interesting because one thing that this movie didn't do that the prior ones did was you never really found anything about him, why he's so messed up or evil. He just existed.
Yeah,
which I think that makes it so much more enjoyable because, like, to me, something's just scarier when it's just evil for no reason. Like when you don't give me a reason for something, but it's just terrifying and just is destructive. That makes it something that's a little more terrifying than if it's like, oh, well, when he was a kid, blah, blah, blah. It's like, don't give me that. Just make it scary for no reason. That way I don't know how to deal with it,
Yeah, you're wasting time explaining something that doesn't really need to be explained. So therefore it's wasted time. Spend that time developing the characters or jump scares, which this film does.
Very effectively. Another thing, too, I enjoyed is, like, they never gave you a good look at him till, like, the end of the movie. Mm-hmm. which I think is so much more effective because like it makes you more scared to see what it really is. You know, because like you never really you gotta see him a little bit. Like one of the more effective ones, I think, like the girl Quinn, she was laying in her bed, and I actually one of my favorite things in the movie is after she, you know, like she talks to Elise in the beginning of the movie, and Elise tells her that she shouldn't try to contact her mom anymore because she could actually be contacting just anybody, you know,
any of the dead.
Yeah, any of the dead. And she continues to still talk to her mom, and she thinks that she hears something in the vent. And I think you can hear like a little bit of breathing or something through the vent because she steps up on her bed. Well, the next day she does an audition, and you see like this weird looking thing waving at her. You know, and then like later on at night, she sees the same weird thing waving at her again, and she waves back, and she gets hit by it. And then she comes home, and there's like a kind of a black lady in the movie that's kind of like I don't want to. She's got kind of seems like she has Alzheimer's or something.
She's like Scatman Crothers from The Shining.
Yeah,
where she knows something's going on.
Yeah, she knows something's going on.
The Shining.
And I think one of the better scenes of the movie is she's like, the man who can't breathe was in your room last night. I could hear him.
Yeah.
And like to me, that like set up the dread of her having to go back into that room because like she got back and everybody's like talking to her, and the only thing she's focused on is the room. Yeah. That just sets up a good amount of dread.
As I mentioned before, like he knows how to build suspense. It's not just boom, there's a scare. Like everything he does kind of draws the audience in, and he sets these things up in layers. I'm like, okay, well, yeah, like as you mentioned, she's waiting to get in her room, or one of the most effective scenes for me was when she's in her bed and he comes walking for her. She gets thrown out of the bed, and then he's walking around closing the window.
Yeah, like was
the door. That was an awesome scene of just suspense that I feel like the first film didn't have any, like that was the first two films couldn't compare to that scene at all.
And that was probably one of the best scenes. And two, on top of that, your legs are broke, so she couldn't get away anyway.
Yeah, and that's the twist I was talking about too, which kind of reminds me of Rear Window, Alfred Hitchcock's, where it kind of, he's in that film, he's disabled, so he's seeing this stuff going on, but then when people come to his place, he's at a disadvantage. So this kind of draws out that whole film, and it also kind of felt a little bit like Psycho, where there's a twist where obviously she doesn't die, but I didn't know maybe if she was going to be in a coma for the film and be in a further where she gets hit right away and it kind of comes out of nowhere. So,
the most disturbing scene for me in the entire movie is just like when she breaks her cast off and walks on her broken legs. And the stuff crunching.
And that's in the trailer.
Like I was just, oh man.
I know. After watching the trailer, I'm like, oh, I would have not enjoyed that scene as much if I had already seen it.
And I was just disconcerted. Like, did she mess her legs up? Did they have to go back to the hospital? Did it heal correctly?
I would be screaming as soon as she came to.
It's just funny to me is like a lot of times now, like I just catch myself as being older and having done a bunch of dumb stuff in my life. Like I just get more concerned. Like William was saying, man, her legs are gonna be fucked up, or like, watching the Mad Max series, like, man, those motherfuckers are gonna be sunburnt. Like that just like of all the things that are afflicting these people, I just feel like that go to those stupid things like getting sunburnt or like your legs are gonna be messed, stupid stuff like that.
And two, just at least the ending of this movie, I guess, gave you the indications that everything turned out okay, but
yeah.
And
real quick too, just so I don't sound stupid, when I mentioned it was like Psycho, in Psycho, the main protagonist who you think gets killed off early on. So that's what I felt like was maybe going to happen in this film. So this kind of draws in, like I said, a little bit of Psycho, a lot of Rear Window, and some of The Shining, and her being disabled, both legs broken, like that puts a whole nother twist on this whole thing, this whole film, and it just makes it so much interesting than having somebody running around the whole time. Like it added so much to the film, and it's exactly what. It's just another one of those things that set this film apart from typical ghost.
Another thing too I liked is like the dad kind of like this movie only played up on one thing in horror movies I didn't like, where like the dad, like he knew something weird was going on, but they typically left her alone by herself a lot. Like they found the weird footprints in the upstairs room, and they see all these things where they know something's like going on, but they still leave her alone. And that's like that's one of the major issues I have with this movie is like, I just hate that. It's like You know something's fucked up going on, something's not right, but yet the person that's being afflicted by this stuff is the one that gets left alone the most.
When both her legs are broken.
Yeah, both her legs are broken, so she can't get away. And like the dad, like William said, he's just kind of oblivious a little bit, but it still worked out. And I think that added to the tension of the movie.
Yeah, it's not a perfect film at all. There's a lot of little things like that, and like I said, some of it's like, we're kind of explaining the backstory and some connecting some dots, but.
It's a B horror movie that's a ghost story. So
yeah.
But overall, though, I think like if you were wanting to have a good horror movie experience, just a fun movie experience during the summer, I think this is a really good one to watch. I think, like Sean said, this is a movie I think you get more out of it in the theater than you do at home.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that the ambiance that the theater puts out is better than when you can get watching it in your couch at home. I think the general feel. I think too, like these movies. For better or worse, the crowd can make it more enjoyable depending on the type of people you're watching it with. But generally, I think sometimes it's fun too. Just since we're doing the reviews for this and stuff, it's better to see what other people think and just seeing the crowd reactions. Because if you go to a horror movie and like Poltergeist, there was zero reaction. Whereas this movie, there was a lot of reaction and there was a lot of you could tell it was bothering people and made people uneasy to watch. And I think that's something that bodes well for this movie, because a lot of times you might go to a movie and if you see it with 50 people and nobody's into it, then something's not right with it.
Yep. So, like I said, I think we're short on time, so I think that's going to go ahead and wrap things up. So, we all enjoyed the movie. It's actually had some pretty scary moments in it. If you like the first two, or if you just are interested, it's definitely worth checking out. So as always, thanks for listening. We'll have a new episode next week.
See you.